Okay, it's 9:05. Do you want to get going?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, well, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for taking time out of your day today to spend some time and attend our first virtual town meeting. We have a lot to cover, so welcome. Thanks for coming, and let's get started.
Thanks, Dawn. Hi, everyone. I'm Sue McCormick, and I know many of you through my work with the district over the past several years. And I'm happy to serve as the moderator for the meeting today to just keep things flowing. I also want to introduce Gabe, who is graciously helping out with the technical support for the meeting and to also help things run smoothly. So thank you, Gabe. And Gabe and I will be checking in with each other throughout the meeting. I want to tell you just a little bit about what we're planning for our time together this morning. The purpose of the meeting this morning is really to just share some information about the current context and the situation that the district finds itself in right now. And we're going to frame that up through a combination of sharing a couple of videos and also hearing from some people on the board who have been working on these issues. We're also going to talk a little bit about the process going forward for making some pretty consequential decisions that are facing the district. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions. And then we are going to break into some small groups and give everybody a chance to just talk through what questions you have, what your hopes and concerns are, and also to come up with some key questions that you would like to have answered that we can share back with the district leaders so that they can address some of those questions. We may not get to all of the questions in this particular meeting, but I think they'll get back in touch with you. Just a couple of considerations for this virtual meeting, and Gabe, maybe you could share the screen for just a minute. So one thing we just want to let you know is that this meeting is being recorded, and so we just want you all to be aware of that. We also are going to ask you all, I think everybody's doing that so far, just to mute your microphone when you're not speaking so that we don't have background noise. I think a lot of people are getting expert at this, so that's already seems to be happening. We also just wanted to encourage you to use the chat to collect, if you have questions, to put them in the chat. And we want to encourage you not to use the chat for a conversation. That's just going to be a little too much for us to manage, but we can definitely field your questions from the chat. And then for the part of the meeting where we're going to be in some small group conversations, just a few general agreements that can help. Just make sure in your small groups that you're really listening carefully to all ideas and that everyone in the group gets a chance to speak. And also, if people are sharing personal stories in those small groups, we just want to make sure that those are confidential unless you have permission to share them. And the purpose of creating those agreements at the beginning is just because we want you to be able to have a very frank and productive conversation. And so those are some basic things that might help. And the other thing that I'll say is I know many of us are experiencing some connectivity issues. So if you're having some trouble, you can try turning off your video, and sometimes that will help you at least be able to hear a little bit better. So I think I'll just pause there for a moment and see if anybody has anything they want to add or any comments just about the basic way we're going to conduct the meeting. Okay. Thanks, Gabe. So now we just want to get a quick sense of who is with us. And we have enough people here that we're not going to take the time to do introductions, but we actually have a couple of quick polls that we're going to invite you to take. And one is just going to find out what your connection is to the school, and one is going to find out what town you're from. So Gabe, if you can share that polling option, we'll just invite you all to take this. And Gabe, if you could go ahead and just share those poll results with us. Gabe, if you want to unmute and let us know.
The poll says it's in progress, but I'm not seeing any results from the poll.
So I think towards the top there might be a share button.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it. It's strange. It says poll in progress. Attendees are now viewing questions, and there's no results coming in.
Are people feel free to unmute? Are you all submitting your responses?
I was
Yes.
able to submit.
Yeah.
Okay.
We could always do a roll call, Sue, in the chat. Just have people enter those answers in the chat.
Yes, if why don't we do that? So just in the chat, just put what town you're from and to everybody, and also your connection with the school would be great. And Gabe, maybe you'll figure that out for us.
Yeah, I'm wondering if maybe when I end the poll, it'll let me show it.
Oh yes, end the poll. Go ahead.
Yes.
Okay, I think Gabe's there. We go. Okay,
So,
thanks so much, Gabe. So most of the folks here about half the people are family members of students, and we have a bunch of community members, which is great, some school board members and some staff, and we don't have any students with us. And then we have folks from all of the towns. We will have a good representation from Bristol and Lincoln, not as many from Starksboro, but we do have folks from all 5 towns on the call, so that's great. Thanks so much, Gabe, for doing that.
Yeah.
Okay. So to continue on with this initial setting the stage, we kind of know who's in the room. I just want to turn it over to Patrick for a minute to just give us a little update on how things are going, how are the students doing. We didn't mention this at the beginning, but of course it goes without saying, we're just in a really unprecedented time right now between the pandemic and just a lot of uncertainty and a lot of divisiveness in our political life, calls for racial justice. There's just a lot of uncertainty and a lot of really big issues percolating for all of us. And so we thought it would be good for Patrick to just give a very brief update about how schools are doing, how some of the students are faring during these unprecedented times. So Patrick, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, thank you. So this is now, I think, week 6 of being back in school since the September 8th start. And probably as most folks know, we started all of our grades, pre-K through 12, in a hybrid model. And that had its challenges. This is now week 2 of our elementary students being back in person 5 days a week with early release days on Wednesdays, with an option for a virtual elementary school for those who choose that. Currently, there are 32 students enrolled in our virtual elementary school. Our hybrid model is still in place in the 7-12. So those students are at school in person 2 days a week and remote 3 days a week. There's also an option for fully remote, and there are currently 63 students in that fully remote mode here at Mount Abe. The elementary return to full in-person is going really well. People are adjusting to the new normal, right? I think in conversations I've had with people, there's an appreciation for how normal it feels, despite it being far from normal, really. But the masks and the distancing and all those practices and routines are feeling pretty solid right now. Mount Abe is still working in a hybrid, which is really hard. It's hard for teachers to juggle, and this was true for the elementary as well. It's hard for teachers to juggle the in-person students, the hybrid students, and the all-remote students. But teachers at Mount Abe are doing a great job. Having these Wednesdays where there are no students in person is really important to give teachers time to stay on top of all 3 groups of students. So we definitely appreciate having that. Early on, there's definitely still an emphasis on the socially and emotionally healthy kids, which actually is one of the community values that surfaced in the fall. Guidance counselors are checking in with students, and staff are all really focused on supporting students' social and emotional health. We are really happy to have our elementary students back 5 days a week. We know how hard it was for families during our all remote and our hybrid models, juggling home life, work life, school life, and that really created some hardships for our families. Even though we offered childcare during that period, we know it still created some hardships. Having the elementary kids back 5 days a week is really critical in helping to ensure equity for our students, which is also a community value and part of our strategic plan. We know that during our all remote phase in the spring and then during the hybrid this fall as well, there's a tremendous inequity in the kinds of supports and experiences that students are having when we're in that remote mode. So having them back in person really helps address those inequities. Similar challenges exist at Mount Abe with a hybrid model. So some students are doing really well with a hybrid, like that flexibility with a schedule, some in person and a lot not in person works well for them. But we also know it's a real challenge for some students as well. So we are continuing to look for ways to bring students in the 7-12 back for more in-person instruction, but we need to be able to do it safely and confidently. And unfortunately, we haven't yet been able to find a way to do that while adhering to the guidance from the Department of Health and the Agency of Education. But we are going to keep exploring those options, and we'll keep monitoring the status of the pandemic in our area, and we'll continue to watch how the guidance evolves at the state level. We're very aware, and we talk about this from time to time at the leadership level, we are very aware that there's risk to bringing students back for more in-person instruction. And it's really important to know there's risk to not bringing students back for in-person instruction. And we're trying really hard to navigate those risks and make decisions that are in the best interest of our students. And we're going to continue to navigate those risks as this pandemic unfolds over the next several months. All in all, we feel really good about the way we've been able to bring students back and kind of reopen this fall. We've done some evolving as that has happened, and we're going to continue to evolve throughout. So that's sort of the status of where we are now.
Great. Thanks so much, Patrick. And now we're going to turn it over to Krista for a little bit to talk a little bit about some of the work that's been happening to engage with the community at the same time all of this stuff is unfolding around the pandemic. There's also some really important big picture questions and dilemmas the district is grappling with. And Chris is going to talk a little bit about the work to keep the community engaged and informed as those conversations are happening about some of the long-term issues. So Krista?
Thank you, Sue. And I hope everyone can hear me all right. I apologize that my video is being kind of wonky. So I would much rather be speaking to you more in person, but here we have it. So I want to also say thank you to Patrick for that update and just recognizing what a unique and challenging start to the school year it's been. So I think it's great to get a sense of how it's going. And I'd like to also acknowledge and appreciate how hard all of our teachers and staff and administrators have been working to make this the best start to the school year as possible. But as Sue said, I'd like to talk a little, I'd like to shift gears and talk about work that began before the pandemic. And for the past year and a half, the school board's been working really hard to inform our community about some of the more chronic, longer-term challenges we've been grappling with. And one of the things that we've done is to develop a series of short videos. And I think they do a really nice job of framing this dilemma in a pretty clear and concise way. You may have already seen them, but I hope you don't mind if we play them again here. This first video is just over 2 minutes long. So Gabe, if you can just play that for us, that would be great. I think that's the second one. If you can go to the slide before that. Yep, there you go. Thank you. And I think you can probably make it fill the screen there.
Okay, Gabe, I think you also have to unmute yourself so we can hear.
Hang on, everyone. Thanks for your patience.
Maybe Gabe's thing has to open.
Gabe has to unmute himself. There we go.
built
And
in
then if
1969 to meet.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
always.
Over 50 years ago, Bristol, Lincoln, Moncton, New Haven, and Starksboro came together to form the Addison Northeast Supervisory Union. A group of ANESU administrators, community, and board members had Mount Abraham Union Middle and High School built in 1969 to meet five-town students' educational needs. Fast forward to 2016. All five towns vote to consolidate, and the Mount Abraham Unified School District is created. Like many school districts in Vermont, MAUSD is facing significant challenges, most of which predated the current COVID-19 pandemic. 1. Decreased state funding due to declining student enrollment. 2. Improving student outcomes. 3. Aging facilities. And 4. Ensuring all students have access to equitable academic experiences. The complex question we face in 2020 is this: how can we shape our future together and create a vision to improve our students' education in a sustainable and fiscally responsible way? To help begin gathering information to answer that question, MAUSD reached out to the five-town communities and held 7 community engagement meetings in the fall of 2019. Over 250 parents, community members, staff, students, administrators, and board members attended these meetings. Values, ideas, and essential questions expressed at these meetings have informed administrators and the board as we problem solve what configuration of programming, facilities, grades, and staffing will best serve our pre-K through 12 students in the future. As in the late 1960s, the five-town schools are at a critical juncture. In the next of our series of 3 videos, we'll share more details about the challenges, including the MAUSD financial picture, enrollment trends, and information from the NESDEC Facilities Best Use Study. After we share this critical information, MAUSD will continue seeking community input via a survey in October. Thank you for watching. Please share with your friends and neighbors.
Thanks for showing that, Krista. And before Krista goes on to the second video, I thought I would just jump in for a minute and talk a little bit about some of the core values that we heard during those conversations. And I had the privilege of being at all of those conversations, and there were just some really strong things that came through from the community that were very aligned across all of the 5 towns. In fact, one of the most surprising things about that work was the incredible alignment across the 5 towns. And what people really cared about, of course, their students. We had lots of family members and educators in the room for those conversations. People, if you were there, you'll remember there was a lot of conversation about making sure that your students are able to communicate, interact, be in meaningful relationship with others. There's lots of concerns about social media and technology and learning to navigate that well. And so this idea of having socially and emotionally healthy kids was really important. People also talked a lot about their desire for, academic excellence. There's a lot of conversation about having varied opportunities for students, having programming that was flexible and able to meet the needs of a lot of different students, and that students actually had the agency to really direct their own learning. So there's a real desire for flexibility and robust programming. And then there were also some other really strongly held values that came out as well around the desire for town schools and the feeling that being connected to the community was really important. People really loved the idea that students were known, that all students had at least one caring adult or more that was either a school presence or a community presence to help them navigate their way. So those were a couple of the things that we heard and that came through really strongly in those conversations. And with that little review, I'm going to turn it back over to Krista.
Okay, thank you, Sue. And so in the second video, so we've come out with 2 so far. We've got a third one that is in the works. But in this second video, we lay out some of the more specific information and talk about the process that we're using to determine which options have the most promise in terms of building a long-term sustainable facilities plan for our district. So I'd like to ask Gabe to play that video, which is about 3.5 minutes long.
Welcome to MAUSD Shorts number 2, The Reality. In the last video, we shared current and future challenges facing the 5-town schools and how administrators, the board, staff, students, parents, and community members came together to identify education values and vision. In video number 2, we'll present the data driving this conversation and details about how we'll continue to seek community input. In 2010, there were 1,662 students in the 5-town schools. By last year, that number had dropped by 18.5% to 1,354. Projections from the New England School Development Council predict another 15% drop in student enrollment by 2030. What makes this concerning is that any drop in student enrollment creates a deficit in the MAUSD budget. We are only allowed to spend up to the state per pupil spending threshold before paying a tax penalty. The state created this mechanism to control the cost of education. For each dollar spent above a given year's spending threshold, communities must send an extra dollar to the state. The MAUSD board has chosen to stay below that threshold to avoid paying this penalty. Because of fixed costs, such as salaries, health insurance, and building costs, we have to make up deficits with reductions to staff and/or programming, deferring building maintenance or upgrades, or by raising taxes. Looking 5 years out, if we keep the same programming, staffing levels, and facilities we have today, projections indicate we would exceed that state spending threshold by as much as $6.5 million. What would that mean for our school tax rates? Using current assumptions and projections, if we make no changes, school tax rates for a home valued at $200,000 are projected to increase $1,598 by 2026. Due to projected enrollment declines, taxes become unsustainable even before 2026. A side note, the long-term fiscal projections presented in this video will not be affected by legislature's short-term relief actions due to COVID-19 for the 2022 budget. While schools will need less staff due to declining enrollment, if we are to cut the budget through personnel cuts alone, it would also cause a significant reduction in programming as well. This goes against our community's education values, which prioritize improved educational outcomes and options for students. In the NESDEC Best Use study of the 6 MAUSD schools, you can see each have space. None are at capacity, and some can take in many more students than they currently have. The Facilities Feasibility Planning Committee has been working with the NESDEC study and input from the community engagement meetings to begin creating a menu of possible options. They are considering academic programming, operating, maintenance and renovation costs of each building, and looking at the advantages of keeping town schools open as they consider the most viable options for moving forward. MAUSD has shared this information to help the 5-town community understand that together, we need to make some significant decisions to help keep our school districts affordable, sustainable, and take care of students' academic needs into the future. Video number 3 will focus on future possibilities. We will be giving community members a chance to ask questions about this information and provide input through a virtual town hall on October 14th and 20th, and a survey at the end of October. You can find more in-depth data and information, including the NESDEC study, and how to sign up for one of our October town halls on our website, www.mausd.org/CEC. Thank you for watching. Please share this video with other 5-town friends.
Thanks, Gabe.
Okay.
And Krista, I'm going to hand it back over to you to.
Yes. Thank you. So that's a brief overview of some of the information we're grappling with, and I'd like to introduce Kevin Hansen, who is the chair of the Facilities Feasibility Study Committee. And he's going to talk a little bit more in detail about both the NESDEC report and the work of his committee. So I will turn it over to you, Kevin.
Thank you. Again, my name's Kevin. I represent Bristol on the board, and as well as being on the Facilities Feasibility Committee. The kind of a little bit of background about the NESDEC report. There's been people that have looked at it today that have kind of questioned how inclusive it was, if you will, with the various options that have been aired. So the report was commissioned to analyze current capacity of students and enrollment trends. And the assessment looked at each of the schools and the current utilization as part of that assessment. And it went into a deeper dive, if you will, of projecting future enrollment based on what they were seeing for trends. And they also looked at a greater depth than has been looked at over the past few months through the engagement processes. They looked at birth rates, current in process, if you will, students from birth to pre-K. They looked at and they melded that with trends from the recent past to develop what is likely the projection going forward for not only the next 5 years, but they were looking out as far as 10 years, as well as their crystal ball could allow them to see. They also did an analysis of housing in the 5 towns, what the construction rate's been over the last 10 years, what zoning regulations are, how they're set up, and what they would encourage or allow, if you will, to kind of like make an evaluation of where the housing market, if you will, would support any change in population over what they projected with the birth rates. They also looked at the real estate market to see how healthy the area is. And they melded this also with their experience in the region. They're a Massachusetts firm or based company and do a lot of work throughout New England, and tempered that a little bit with national trends. So the report addressed the possible reutilization options based on these enrollment projections that they developed. The report also looked at the potential to partner with Addison Northwest, or what's commonly known as the Virgin School District. The report acknowledged all six school operations through their analysis of each school in the district, but they didn't verbalize an option to keep all 6 open, as it was an assumed option from their point of view. And that has caused some concern that maybe that option had been forgotten, but in reality, NESDEC didn't really have anything to offer, and really it's within the expertise of the current administration through the superintendent and his staff to evaluate that option based on they're the ones that know what the knowns are and the history and likely melding with the projections overall for the district of where that option can go. So that's kind of like where the report helped us go. There wasn't a lot of aha moments in the report. There was better understanding of some of the assumptions that we had or were making. And it allowed us to basically continue the path of where we had been with our community engagement and administration considerations from last fall. We know that we must have to make changes about how our operations are currently seen, or how the operations are. And really, it's a twofold question or twofold issue. It's like there's a 1 to 3 year period where, if anything, from a more intensive point of view was to happen, there would be this 1 to 3 year short-term planning period, and then we're also looking at kind of a 3 to 10 year range where you would see longer range projections and what might need to be considered over that longer period of time, and recognizing that the short term 1 to 3 years would be an implementation period for something that would happen in longer range. Again, the NESDEC report provided a deeper dive into demographics, enrollment, and facilities capacity that we had initially started within locally. So that was a good thing to understand and realize that we were operating within a reasonable realm, if you will. Some of the things that need to be considered, both from the board's point of view and the community's point of view, and their tough questions and the type of things that we're grappling with, is the board needs to understand how we're going to use schools as they are today or in some other educational use. And through the superintendent, we need to understand what type of educational experience students will have, i.e. the programming aspects, if you will. The board has taken the tack to date to stay within the state per pupil spending threshold. As explained in the video, that can be a very expensive penalty should we go over if that is deemed necessary, while they're presenting budgets to the district for voting. Some of the tough things for the towns to grapple with is the ongoing need to provide a tax base or funding, if you will, through local, state, and federal taxes for that matter, as budgets escalate if they're not controlled. They also need to assess any desire by the board to close an elementary school through a town vote in that town as the Articles of Agreement stand today. So we're kind of looking at different things and what the challenges is and what may inform the decision-making process for these challenges. The superintendent and his team continue to evaluate options based on their expertise and which is really central to understanding what the issues are, and work with the Community Engagement Committee and the Facilities Feasibility Committee to kind of augment and provide another perspective as they work those issues. The Feasibility Committee has been charged to provide perspective as advisors to the superintendent. So we are giving a perspective. We're not making a conclusive recommendation. The committees comprised of school board members. There's 2 school board members, there's 2 community members, and the superintendent, assistant superintendent, and the business manager are also part of that team. The team was charged with, in the charge for the subcommittee, the group was charged with 18 essential questions. These questions were developed at the end of the day after a day-long meeting that finalized the fall engagement activity, if you will, where committee members, administrators, and the school board reviewed the scenarios that had been developed and were progressing towards some consideration at that point. And these questions were developed at the end of the day. 13 of them, there's 18 altogether, 13 of them are really within the realm of the expertise of the superintendent and his administration. They deal with hard issues like cost, transportation, any sort of redistribution, those sort of things. There was two questions that really have been maybe not consciously, but they have been worked by have worked or being worked by the Community Engagement Committee, which has left 3 questions that are sort of soft, if you will. There's a lot of perspective, opinions to sift through the work for the facilities communication or facilities community committee to deal with, and we're working those 3 questions right now. So the facilities group has begun discussion of these 3 questions, which have to do with the impact of towns and students with school closings, whether the town or the towns how the towns would fare if the high school was moved away, and then the impact on community without a town school. So those are primarily the three questions that the facilities committee is working on. We briefly discussed those questions in October at our October meeting, and didn't fully discuss them. We took them on as homework, if you will, to think about them a little bit more and put all the inputs, if you will, together and discuss a consolidated concept, a melded concept, if you will, or opinion, and pick the points or finalize that discussion through our November meeting. We also developed a scenarios matrix that as we are dealing with a lot of different options and a lot of different considerations, it made sense to lay them out on a piece of paper and give a visual understanding of what we're working with and trying to start understanding point by point the benefits and or liabilities of each option, if you will, across a variety of considerations. So the matrix, as far as the options are concerned, were divided into three categories. Essentially, one category or one option bucket would be to continue operating all 6 campuses. Another option or bucket would be to reconfigure the campuses within the district. And the third bucket is to partner with another district, namely Addison Northwest, as well as any sort of reconfiguration considerations. So the options were divided up into these 3 larger areas, and then they were are being evaluated across a variety of parameters. And the parameters are, again, grouped into programming or educational considerations, dollars or cost, or brick and mortar, or the impact of reconfiguring campuses. All of the community core values that were developed last fall, there's 11 of them, are part of this chart. The charge questions that the facilities committee is grappling with are part of the chart, as well as a few additional items, particularly from a cost point of view, were made part of the chart. The assessment, the intent of the assessment is still fairly high level. We're just ranking a positive, negative, or neutral aspect of each item on the chart. And again, we've started the discussion at our October meeting, and given the limitation of time and length of the discussion, we have taken a certain amount of that work as homework, and we'll be melding it or consolidating it for a more thorough discussion of a total overview, if you will, at our November meeting. Ideally, we will be working to determine what is the best option of the options in each one of the categories. You know, that's operating 6 campuses, reconfigure campuses, or to partner. I think that pretty much summarizes some of the challenges to the district and where the feasibility committee is working and hoping to come up with some information to help the superintendent make his decision. So I think, Krista, it's back to you. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kevin. So that is a lot of information to digest. And we're going to pause here. And I think Sue is going to help facilitate a Q&A. And I did want to say that, and thank you to Nancy for adding the link to the feasibility study committee charge, which also has the scenarios and essential questions. I'm going to add a link to a document where I'm going to capture notes from these questions and from the discussion in a little bit. But at the top of that, we'll include links to some of these supporting documents, so everything is in one place and will be shared out with all of you. And then if other resources come up that people want to have at their fingertips, we can add those as well. So I guess I will hand it over to Sue, and I'll put that document in the chat now.
Thank you, Krista. So we want to pause here and give you an opportunity to ask questions of Kevin or Krista or Patrick or anybody on the call. And just to help us navigate this, there's a participant button on the, if you're on a computer, it's on the lower part of your screen. If you're on an iPad, it might be on the left. But if you click on the participant button, there's a feature at the bottom that says raise hand. So if you click on that and raise your hand, that's one way that we'll know that you want to speak. Or you can just chime in. Also, feel free to put a question in the chat box. And I'm also going to encourage us to maybe turn on our videos if your technology will allow it for this part of the meeting, so we can kind of see each other while we're taking questions. And Gabe, you may need to tell me, I don't see any hands raised, but it may be that you're the one that's going to see those. So if you see any.
Looks like Cheryl has her hand raised.
Go ahead, Cheryl.
Thank you. First, I just want to say thanks for providing us with so much information and these opportunities to give ideas and ask questions. It's deeply appreciated. I'm curious, I know that there are 23 other school districts in the state who are sort of up against this looming penalty deadline, and I'm curious about how we're working with them to either ask the legislature to slow down these penalties for a year, given all the changes with COVID, or if we might have some capacity to work together with those other 23 districts to say we need some change. We need a little bit of relief this year because things are so different.
Thanks, Cheryl.
I can take a stab at responding to that. I think part of what I was inferring from that question, Cheryl, was sort of in the context of COVID-19 and all of that. And the legislature did act to hold districts harmless for their average daily membership, or ADM, which is a sort of a student number figure that's used in generating an equalized pupil number, which is really what we use to build budgets. So there has been some activity already at the legislative level to kind of offer a little bit of breathing room for FY22. Our understanding right now, though, is that that sort of hold harmless sunsets after FY22, and our numbers then sort of catch up to us, if you will, for FY23, right? So we aren't going to be penalized for a drop in students for FY22, but we are actually going to experience a drop in students in FY22. And then we'll see another drop in FY23. And in FY23, we'll have to build a budget that reflects the drop in both FY22 and 23. So it does give us a temporary reprieve from what would otherwise have been a really hard budget year, but it catches up to us.
And
can I just add, are we working with also about getting the state to pick up the cost of health insurance so that that's not a burden on the school districts?
There hasn't been any conversation that I've heard of about the state picking up the cost of health insurance. The state now negotiates health insurance at the state level for all employees in school districts, but there hasn't been any conversation that I'm aware of that being picked up by the state. That's still a cost burden borne by the local school districts.
Thanks.
And part of your question I didn't really address is, are we working together with the other 23 school districts? I know we work really closely as a Champlain Valley group of superintendents, and I would say even more so the Addison County superintendents, in particular Addison Central, Addison Northwest, and us here at MAUSD. We're all in a really similar boat in terms of declining enrollments and the cost implications of that. I would say Addison Northwest is probably a year ahead of us in terms of the significance of the cost implications, and Addison Central is maybe a year behind us. But we're all kind of working through the same kind of issues, and we do meet and talk about those challenges. So in that way, I would say we are working together. And it's a very similar struggle in each of our areas.
Go ahead, Adrian.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just wondering if you can articulate some of the criteria that would be used under options, the two options that are in the feasibility study, scenario 2A and 2B. Like how you would, what are some of the criteria you would use to assess which elementary schools were the ones that remained open?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's directed to me or more to Kevin for the facilities group that's going to be weighing that.
Well, it would be directed to whoever identified that scenario.
From the facilities communication, or I'm sorry, the facilities committee's point of view, we're not going to recommend closing specific schools. We're going to recommend what makes sense for the reduction or consolidation. There's a lot of variables that go into that consolidation, if you will, that is much more refined detail than what our committee, the level our committee is operating at. There's a lot of variability about which schools close, and that could impact renovation costs potentially. So that information will ultimately be by the superintendent's recommendation when he and his staff get to the level of making some more finite recommendations after we kind of hone in on what makes sense from our group's point of view with all the options that are available. We're basically trying to screen the options and make it easier to give a point of view as to what's the most viable thing in the three categories that we're looking at.
And Kevin, just a further point of clarification before we go back to Adrian or Patrick. Kevin, you mentioned there are three buckets you're looking at, and one bucket is the current configuration. The second bucket is some kind of consolidation, and then the third is a partnership. In that second bucket, how many scenarios are you currently looking at? Are those?
There's maybe four-ish.
Yeah. Okay.
There's the 2A and 2B that Adrian referred to, and then there are, and then there's a NASDAQ option that, in my mind, it's listed, but in my mind, it's essentially it's virtually similar to, I think, option 2, and then I think there's 2 more NASDAQ options. So that's 5 options within that bucket.
Okay. I just thought that would be helpful for people to have that context. Go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, so is it accurate to say that the superintendent's office has not yet developed the criteria because they are awaiting the facilities report as one of the inputs?
Yeah, I think we're definitely still in the process of collecting information and thoughts from folks. If I think about, and there are many nuances to it, but I think the big considerations would be the capacity of the building, the needs of the building, and the impact if a town didn't have that school, what would the impact on the town be? Because if the impact is perhaps different town to town. But those are 3 of the significant considerations, I think. And then there are many, many nuances beyond that.
Any other questions? Well, let's take a pause. Go ahead, Cheryl. You do have another one. You have to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry. Thank you for letting me ask another question.
Sure.
I didn't see anywhere that we had done an asset map of potential other users of the buildings for necessary, like who's available in the community that might want to run childcare or after-school care, or put in healthcare services in that unused, or whatever we're calling the excess capacity of those buildings. And I'm wondering if that might be a helpful thing, or maybe it's been done and I just was not looking in the right place to find it.
That thought comes up a lot in discussion. That the level that the facilities committee is working at, we're not looking at, we're looking more at utilization of buildings, not repurposing, I guess you could say. So it's not germane to the committee, but maybe Patrick can talk a little bit more about the discussions to date, because that whole concept has come up through a variety of meetings.
Thanks.
Yeah, and that conversation, as Kevin said, has come up a few times over. We've looked at that, and I think there are some possibilities there, and there's some potential for some revenue and some creative use of space. In terms of leaning on that kind of use of our space and that revenue, it's insignificant relative to the kinds of financial pressures that we're under in terms of the money it would generate. So I forget exactly what the cost per square foot was that we discovered through a little research about what's kind of the going rate for leasing out space. But we would have to lease out something like 150 classrooms to generate sufficient revenue to sort of make a dent in our financial challenges. And obviously, I don't think we even have 150 classrooms total in the district. So when we looked at it from that perspective, though there's some possibilities there that I think may warrant exploration, depending on how the sort of master plan ends up moving forward, it's insufficient to meet the financial needs that we expect.
Go ahead, Sally.
Could I? Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to chime in if I could from the community engagement perspective, because I think that this is a great place where the board in our focus and the administration in their focus don't have the capacity to dive into really fully exploring asset mapping, but that is, I think, critical to any vibrant community, and could be woven in to options if a school building were vacant, or even if it be open but at minimal capacity. It's just that it's difficult for the administration to focus on really diving deep into that work, while also trying to get a handle on clear and information that can help us right now. And so I would just invite, we had a gathering of community and school folks in the summer to begin those conversations. And I think I would just say that it would be great to have folks thinking about those things and putting time in to really do that work and then share that with us. That is, we're always, I think, open to that. It's just that we also have a timeline by which decisions need to be made based on the information we have right now.
That's the piece I wanted to speak to for just a minute, is the timeline, because I think that's important. We talked a little bit ago about the sort of 1 year breathing room that we seem to have now, thanks to the legislative action to hold harmless for a drop in our average daily membership. But from a timeline perspective, I just want to make sure it's understood that short of the board deciding to repurpose a school building, which could happen next year, although any decision, like any really big decision that we're talking about in terms of finding cost savings, in particular through facilities, we wouldn't realize the financial benefits of any of those decisions until FY23 at the earliest. So even though FY22, we have a bit of a reprieve, we're not making really FY22 decisions now when we talk facilities. We're making FY23 decisions. And that, again, is the year when the FY22 impact and the FY23 impact of our declining enrollment will be felt together in that 1 year, because the hold harmless will sunset. I just think that's an important piece.
Patrick, thank you for that. I want to go back to something that the exchange between Cheryl and Krista about the asset mapping. And I just want to put a reminder out there for the people on the Community Engagement Committee, and I think hopefully it will be useful. When we first planned the community conversations in each of the 5 towns, we had planned on part of those conversations being a conversation about what are the possibilities for the school building in your town if for some reason it wasn't able to continue on as a school. We thought it would be really helpful to start having a proactive conversation about that and about some of the possibilities around that. And in the very first town we went to, what we found was that people were not ready to have that conversation. And we changed our plan, and we didn't even ask the question in the other towns. We were really trying to honor where people were, and people just were not there. What I would say is that I think there's a lot of opportunity to do some really innovative things from a town perspective, and there are lots of resources in the state. The Vermont Council on Rural Development is an example of organizations that can come in and help a community create a vision for a building and identify resources to help transform it into something new. And so I just wanted to say that even though we didn't, the school district didn't go forward with that part of the conversation, I do think that that's a really important proactive conversation for people to be having.
Sally, you've had your hand up for a while. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks. This is a great conversation. I'm enjoying it. So my question was, how is the board or the superintendent or anyone exploring what it means, what's the impact for schools if they are lost in a small town? And I think there are studies that are out there, but also how about these specific schools? How would you go about exploring the impacts of that with each community is one. Another is I appreciated hearing from Sue about those studies. And is there a way to work with towns to find a hybrid way of having some school there and also using the school for various very useful things that this town could use? Is there any study that's kind of thinking about a hybrid like that?
Patrick, I think, Patrick, you started to address that earlier around some of what you had looked into around potential partnerships.
Yeah, I can share a little bit about some of the conversations I've had, and maybe Kevin can talk a little bit. I know there's been some studies presented through the facilities group as well. So I've actually reached out to a superintendent who was involved in some school closure in their district in some small towns, and just trying to understand from a really local perspective what has the impact been, and how they navigated that. And through that conversation, and I think through just further thinking and understanding about kind of the direction we're going, the reality is the impact of closing a school in a small town is different town by town. And I think it's readily recognized that a school in a town is part of that town's fabric. And in many cases, it's not the only part of that town's fabric. So I think as we consider the possibility of closing a school in a town, we have to try and understand the more sort of full picture of what makes up that town's fabric. When I think about the role of general stores and town halls and athletics, like there are a lot of different things you can look to that you could say make up the fabric of a town, and you have to think about the role the school plays there. And in the absence of that, what's the likelihood or possibility of those other aspects of a town in sort of picking up what would be lost if the school wasn't there? So that kind of thinking and sort of analysis on a town by town basis, school by school basis seems important. When we look at national studies of closing small schools, from the national level, small schools are schools under, like elementary schools under 600 kids, high schools under 1,000 kids. We don't have small schools in Vermont, we have micro schools in Vermont. And I'm not familiar with a study that talks about the closure of micro schools and its impact. And I think that's been some of the struggles that have come through the conversations at the facilities committee as well. So it's not exactly apples to apples. So for me, it's more helpful to think about it on a town by town, school by school basis, and from that sort of fabric of the community kind of lens.
And I just want to ask, how would we go about doing that on the local level to do that exploration of the fabric and what that impact would be?
It's a good question. The only thing that comes to mind for me is having conversations with folks that are knowledgeable about different aspects of the town and what helps to create that fabric. I think about the role of local town leaders and their knowledge of the town and what happens there. You know, not necessarily every resident of a town has a full understanding of what happens in that town and what makes up its fabric. But I would say most local leaders would have that information.
I would just add that we had discussion about this very issue about reports and what as Patrick mentioned, what a small school really is at the last full board meeting when we talked about the facilities work. And we as a committee are looking more, they're soft questions. We're looking at soft perspectives from, you know, it's a relatively small group, but we're looking more along, you know, the perspectives of the individuals. We have had some report information provided to us, but you need to be cautious about reports because they can be biased and try to lead you a certain way. As far as what the towns feel of value and how they might have some concept of repurposing, the community engagement committee spent a great deal of time kicking off some town school partnership activities or initiatives, and that's really where that, and it seems like that's where that conversation really should be going. And the other thing, and I don't want to start a big discussion here, but the other thing we need to really keep in mind is our schools are operating to educate and form, you know, students. And you know, sometimes I'm not so sure that we don't take that as an assumed function, and we need to make sure that that's in the highlight or forefront of whatever our decisions are.
Robin, you want to go ahead?
Hi, it's my husband, Jerry.
Yeah, hi. I don't know if you can see me. So we're talking about repurposing and centralizing, so to speak, or partnerships. So I wonder if there's been any thought about perhaps some sort of decentralizing of the Hannaford Center. And I don't know how that would affect any fiscal things. For instance, if some program that's now at the Hannaford Center was brought back, say, to Mount Abe, so that it's more accessible to students and there's less transportation costs. Or you could expand on that and imagine expanding vocational opportunities within our local schools or within Mount Abe, and attracting other students from elsewhere, perhaps even. But you know, the first thing would be the idea of decentralizing and bringing back some aspect of the Hannaford programs into Mount Abe. You know, and then there's variations.
Could I speak to that just briefly? This is Allison Sturdivant. I was on the Hannaford board.
Go ahead, Allison. We can hear you.
Thanks, Susan. So decentralizing the majority of the programs would be very, I would say, cost prohibitive, because we serve Middlebury, Mount Abe, and Virgins as well.
Unfortunately,
So,
Allison, oh, there she goes. Allison, we weren't able to hear some of what you just said,
Oh,
so
okay, sorry.
try again.
Sure. So it would be probably very cost prohibitive to decentralize the Hannaford Center, because we serve Middlebury, Virgins, and then the Mount Abe School District. And we also have students that come from Otter Valley and some other places. So if you decentralize and move a program, say to Mount Abe specifically, then you also get into questions of equity of access. Having the Hannaford Center in Middlebury makes it more central to students to be able to access, especially students coming from Otter Valley. And if you decentralize, you might have to have more instructors at different sites, because some programs aren't able to be done in certain places. So it might be an idea to evaluate, but I think it would be very cost prohibitive to do. Just my 2 cents, having been on the board and seeing what it does.
And I would echo most of what Allison said. If we look at the auto tech program at the Career Center as, sort of an extreme example, to have Middlebury and Virgins and Mount Abe each have their own garage and tools and staffing to run a program like that with what would be, a very low enrollment. If we assumed the enrollment stayed similar to what it is now, that would work against the sort of cost savings that we need to find, and the efficiencies ultimately that we need to find to be able to maintain programming. That's an extreme example. There may be some other examples that wouldn't have such overhead in terms of the space and equipment and everything. But I think the same idea of the lack of efficiency in those programmings, I think would still be realized. Those classes right now are relatively low in terms of the number of students there. Allison may know more than I, but my daughter actually attends the Career Center, and the number of students in a class might be at 12 or 15 when you combine the districts. If we try to replicate that in each of the 3 school districts, I suspect the enrollment would be considerably lower, which decreases efficiency.
We can offer that.
Thank you, Patrick. So what I'd like to do now is thank you for all the thoughtful questions. There's a lot of people that have had a chance to speak, and also a lot of people who are just listening, and we want to give everybody on this call a chance to speak with each other. So we're going to break you out into some groups for about 10 minutes. And Gabe, I'm thinking maybe we could do about 9 groups with about 4 people in each group. And in your group, we just want to invite you to just reflect on what you've heard so far. Share a little bit about how you're feeling about the information you've heard, what the communities are facing. And then we'd invite you to talk about any hopes you have for moving forward. And then if there's a key question that you would like to have answered as a group, we'd like to hear that as well. So Gabe, I'm going to invite you to create those rooms, and when it's time to end, it can be a little abrupt, but you'll get about a minute warning. And while you're talking, when you come back, we have a notes document, and Krista shared the link a while back in the chat, but if you have any comments you want to leave in that Google Doc, that's fine, or you can also leave comments right in the chat based on your conversations.
And is it possible to share those questions on the slideshow so people can remember them when they, Gabe, if you want to share your screen to that slide that just shows the 3 questions Sue just articulated? Thank you.
Nope.
So
All right, those breakout rooms.
Yeah. So those are the questions. We can also put those in the chat as well. And we can broadcast them as well in the room. So, great. Okay, Gabe, so if you can work your magic, and we'll have about 10 minutes or so to talk together, and then we'll come back and hear some of your questions. Welcome back, everybody. I know that can be a little abrupt. So I think our group has gotten a little smaller. I know we scheduled this meeting to go to 11, but we're going to try to end in the next 10 or 15 minutes. And what we'd like to do is, I just want to invite a couple people, and hopefully people we haven't heard from yet this morning, to share a highlight or a key question that your group talked about.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Hi, so I was in a group with 2 other people, and I think a question coming from it is that although we realize we have to address the monetary issues, it seems like what's not actively being pursued is the pushback up to the governor and the legislature about how they are going to address the economic issues that are basically causing this problem in the first place. Because school boards long-term cannot solve the issue of younger families leaving Vermont and not staying. And I think dismantling our communities on any level seems to be going in a direction that would suggest that we're not interested in that in the long term. So that was our concern, is that regardless of how we have to address it, what are we doing to strongly push back that this is not how we want to see Vermont grow?
Thank you, Rebecca. Anyone else? I also, while we're waiting to see if someone else would like to speak, I just want to invite you to type your questions into the chat. If your group came up with a key question that you would like to hear more about going forward, you can just type those right in the chat and those will be captured.
I guess I have a process question. So there was 3 questions that we discussed in the breakouts. Are we, what do we do with the results of those 3 questions?
So you can, there's a couple of things you can do, Kevin. You can put some of the highlights in the chat box. Also, Krista shared a link to a Google Doc that she's been using to capture input, and that's another place, if that's a little easier than writing in the chat, you can scroll down to the bottom of that document and put in the highlights from your conversation. So it's a little quiet. I think what I'll do is turn it over to Krista now to talk about a couple of next steps, unless there's anybody who hasn't had a chance to speak, especially who has something they want to share about your conversation. Yes, Coco.
Hi there. Good morning, everyone. I would just like to return to that question that was just posed and find out a little bit more information about what sort of pushback is happening at the state level to figure out ways to support communities and small community schools. Because, you know, I hate to lean on the old saying, penny wise, pound foolish, but you know, if we close these small schools and consolidate districts, are we going to see continued increasing enrollment as families, you know, decide that it's not, that the benefits of living in small rural communities are too challenging? You know, I live in Lincoln. It's a hard place to live in lots of ways. You know, it's the long commute to jobs in Burlington, and some of the real benefits to living in these small communities are the small schools. And so if we see those closing, are we also going to then see more families leaving the communities and resulting in other challenges and budget shortfalls? Thank you.
Sure. I guess what I wonder in hearing that question is, well, maybe Patrick, you could just respond and let people know what kind of efforts, if any, are you or education organizations in Vermont making around these issues? And then I also have a question for the community, which is, are there any community-led efforts to be working with the legislature around some of these? So Patrick?
Yeah, I can offer my sort of assessment of the situation relative to the concept of pushback. So from my view, pushback to the legislature or the governor or some of the sort of higher authorities could be effective if we thought that the conversations we're having and the hard decisions we need to make weren't intended and known to be happening, right? I think when the legislature made the decision to have school budgets built based on a cost per pupil figure, and they put a spending threshold on that, I think it was intentional to control spending. I think it was known that that's going to have an impact on the ability of small schools to continue to function. And I think it was known that it would create the kinds of conversations that we're having now and difficult decisions. And I think it stems from a desire to make Vermont more affordable, which is believed to be a strategy to help bring or keep younger people in Vermont. With my thinking on that and my belief that that was intended, for me, the notion of pushback, right? For me to spend my energies pushing back against what I think was intentional and known to have the effect that it's having, seems like it won't produce the results that I'm looking for. And I'd rather spend my time figuring out how to make what we have to work with work the best way that it can work. Now, that's not to say that there couldn't be something changed and that a community group or the board forming some sort of letter couldn't push on that. But that's just sort of where I come from with my thinking on this situation.
Thanks, Patrick. Is there anyone else that wants to speak to that?
Looks like Rob has.
Go ahead, Gabe.
No, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I can just speak to some of the other statewide efforts that might impact on this. And obviously, one of the most significant is the continued push to say health insurance should not be a responsibility of employers. We've just seen it with COVID that as people lose their jobs, they lose their health insurance just at a time when they shouldn't. And certainly the health insurance costs have been driving school budgets for many years. So there's, I would say, a concerted effort to say we should have health care for all somehow and take that burden away from employers. So that's going on. There's also an effort, and I don't know that it's going to move that fast, but it's not just schools that are being underused, but we have churches closing, Grange Halls closing. There are a lot of town buildings that are closing, and people are saying, could there be a way that some of these facilities could be picked up by something like the Land Trust and then made available back for school uses or childcare programs or others. So those discussions also are underway, and that would sort of scoop out some of the facility burden. Still, the staffing costs are the hugest cost for us, the drivers, and our small group was talking about if we're focusing on programming for students, are there ways that we could redeploy the incredible expertise that we have in less costly and more effective ways so that all of our students are having pathways that work for them particularly?
Thanks, Cheryl. Others? Krista, I don't know if you saw it from Kim. She was asking for the link to the group that is maybe looking at some of these issues.
Oh, yes, I just saw that. Okay, I was typing. So I'm going to put that link in the notes document that everybody's got. But I'm glad you suggested that, Kim, because some of these conversations were started and some of them did continue outside of that school community forum. That's a great reminder for everybody. Just give me a second to pull that up.
And just as a reminder to people, the Community Engagement Committee did convene a meeting of interested town leaders to encourage them to organize around some of these issues that we heard from the community that mattered, and I think that was one of them. And so there is some other work happening that's not directly related to the work of the school district that is addressing some of these issues, I think. So Crystal will share that link. I think that we should probably start to close out. We've been together for quite a while. And what I'd like to do is just see if there's anybody else who has just a burning question or comment they want to make, and then I'm going to turn it over to Krista to just briefly share a few next steps before we close.
Susan, I had one question if I could go.
Sure.
So one question I had is, so this is the start of my 5th fall here at Mount Abraham, and I know each year since I've been here, we've had at least what I would consider pretty significant surpluses at the end of the year, with a pretty wide range. I don't know the exact numbers, but a question that I've always had is there any consistency in the reason for the surpluses? I believe that this past year obviously was totally unprecedented with COVID, but is there any consistency in what has led to those surpluses and the capital reserve fund that's been, I'm still not exactly sure how that works, but how the capital reserve fund has been, we've, I think, been putting money to that or into that. Again, I'm not sure how that account works, but I guess what I'm asking is there consistency in an area that we've been underspending for the past 5 years, and have we identified those areas as a way that we could reduce funding as like a short-term fix to alleviate some of the current stresses we're going to be dealing with over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I can speak to that. And that's basically, that's exactly what's happening. So the reality is there are thousands of lines in the school district's budget, and we build budgets with, long before the need comes, and a lot of things can change between the time a budget's built and passed and the school year starts that it was intended for. And that makes up for a good portion of what our fund balance might be at the end of the year. But I would say the driving factor, and one thing that is consistent, and it's done intentionally and as an attempt to help us alleviate these financial challenges in the easiest way possible, is we have, with maybe one exception, we have elected to not fill anywhere from 6 to 7 or 8 positions each year after the budget's been approved. People leave for various reasons, knowing that we have these difficult financial futures ahead of us. We look at every position that becomes vacant and whether or not it needs to be filled. So when we budget for a position, someone chooses to leave that position, and then we don't fill it because we know we're going to have to make budget cuts. And if we don't fill a position, it's a lot easier than having to fire someone from a position they hold. That creates, that adds to the fund balance that we have at the end of the year. I'd say that's the driving force behind that. The average total compensation for a staff member right now is about $80,000 for a licensed staff member. So for every one of those positions, it's 80 grand that we're not spending that we budgeted for. And so it doesn't take too many of those to drive a pretty significant fund balance. And then the 1,000 other lines that add up make up the difference.
Thanks, Patrick. I think Rob and Robin at one point had their hands up and we didn't see them. Do either of you have something you'd like to say?
Yes. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi,
Okay.
Rob.
So, this is Jerry Urban. So, something to notice in, listening to the interest in pushing back again, to affect changes in legislation and around funding. Something to notice is what happened with the community. I think they're the state colleges, Johnson and Linden, they're called Northern something now. They were going to be closed. There's a lot of pushback. They're open. Now the problems are still out there. So one thing is to notice the effect of the pushback. And 2 is to notice that in some ways we're in the same boat as they are. And it just kind of expands the base of why legislatures should be concerned about local opportunities for education.
Thanks. And Rob?
No, all good. Thank you.
You're good. You're good. Okay. All right. So Krista, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know you had a couple of next steps that you wanted to share with everyone before we close.
Sure. So, so I think everybody hopefully has access to the notes document, and we will add anything from the chat to that and post to the Community Engagement Committee webpage. These discussion questions and responses and the feedback from the next town hall are all going to be shared with the full school board and the administration. And just to let people know about what's next in the process, so we're also, as was mentioned, going to be sending out a survey at the end of October that will go to all 5 town residents. And the goal of that survey is to gauge the community's interest in exploring several different options, as we mentioned before, some of these different buckets of ways to think about our school facilities plan. So the responses from that survey, the recommendations from the feasibility study committee, and the feedback from these virtual town halls are all going to be part of what the administration takes into consideration when figuring out what to present to the school board in December. So the school board will receive their recommendation of 3 to 4 options, and then those will include really specific information like budget and tax implications. Some of the details that people have been asking for, that will be all a part of that presentation. And the board is then going to take that back out to the community for additional feedback before deciding what, if anything, to put on the ballot on town meeting day. So we're working backward from that March date to figure out what we might want to warn for that ballot, which has to happen in mid-January in order to get on a ballot. So the school board's really committed to working hard to continue providing opportunities for your input and for as much information as possible before we ask you to vote on anything. And it's important to remember that no decisions can happen without your vote. So in closing, I'd just like to thank you for coming and being with us today, to please keep an eye out for the survey, to encourage you to attend any of the meetings of the full board, of the Community Engagement Committee, of the Facilities Feasibility Committee. It can be really helpful to just listen in on the conversations that are happening and the ways that those groups are really thinking about this. And the dates and times of those are on the MAUSD website. And I see Sally was asking about the recording of this town hall. So this recording will also be posted, as will the recording from next week's town hall. So, and before we end, I just want to also thank Gabe, who I think in all of his great efforts, he froze his computer. So I don't think he's on the call any longer, but he did a great job up to that point helping us navigate Zoom. And I also want to give a very special thank you to Sue McCormick, who has been partnering with us for a while now, really helping to guide us in the best way to engage and incorporate your input into the decisions we make about the future of our schools. So thank you all, and you'll be hearing more from us soon. And I think, Patrick, you're the host, so you can probably end the meeting. So I hope everybody has a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Great
you.
meeting.